Hello, welcome to the Institute for the Study of Consciousness. I'm Freeman. This is one of a series of conversations we're having here on various subjects in the philosophy of science and consciousness. These conversations are with Arthur Young, philosopher, cosmologist, inventor, and founder of the Institute. Our guest for this session is Dr. Lawrence LeShan, a psychologist who has done extensive research on the paranormal and has worked in a research context with psychics. We're going to be raising a number of issues, cosmological issues, issues around the structure of reality, getting the opinions of Dr. LeShan and Arthur Young and seeing how they contrast. The first question, which we were looking at slightly earlier, is the basic issue of, is there one fundamental encompassing shape of reality? If there's more than one reality, in what sense can you tie them together and fit various realities into some other sort of a structure? I
think that Einstein answered this question very effectively, a long way back when he said, is there a basic shape of reality is a meaningless question. He said, suppose you take the following. Suppose you say, I know what reality really is, and I plan to test it. The last half of this sentence is meaningless. There's no way to test it. You can make various hypotheses. You can prove that various ways of construing reality are wrong. You can prove there is such a thing as schizophrenia. Yeah, I can prove that someone who says there are voices coming out of the electric light bulb is, shall we say, not living in a valid state, a valid reality. But beyond that, to say what is the shape of reality, it seems to me is like saying, is there a valid shape to a lump of clay? The shape of a lump of clay is how you shape it. There are limits to what you can do with it. It's limited. I can't make an arch out of the clay a yard high and a quarter of an inch thick. It'll fall apart. Maybe all we can ever know about the shape of reality are its limitations.
Arthur, same question.
Well, I'll say as I did it here earlier, I think there's some value in approaching it from a topological point of view and in invoking the next order of complexity from the sphere. The sphere is the obvious natural shape for something. And the torus is a sort of further step, but it does, you could say it involves shape, and it does answer some questions that are otherwise almost impossible to, well, even to make sense of. For instance, how can there be finite things in a continuum that's infinite? This is the form that it always struck me as most general. See, if you divide the infinite into pieces, each piece is infinite. This is,
yeah.
So how can there be finiteness in an infinite background is one, and another form of it is, how can there be free will in a universe run by God? This is a religious form of it. And that thing we were talking about, egos. See, it's the, on the one hand you can say egos are very real, but on the other hand, there's something to the Hindu proposition that egos are ephemeral, they're not a final reality. I think there's a possible compromise in the torus shape, because on the torus you can do what's called, it has a different connectivity. In the plane, like the surface of the table or the surface of a sphere, if I cut something all around, I separate it from the rest, and that's the end of that. But the torus, you can cut something all around, provided you include that hole in the middle. You will then have what I would call a pseudo-separation, in that this piece has a boundary all around itself, but it has a sort of invisible umbilical cord with the rest. And this is a way to reconcile this apparent finiteness, pseudo-finiteness, with the universal.
Would you say that this was an application you could make to all domains of reality, to the domains of things that are too small to see or touch.
Provided you were inclusive enough. You see, when you take pieces like, the bricks of a house or something, I wouldn't give them this kind of special reality. But living things, I would say yes. You could argue this. I don't want to make a final thing, but it changes the whole ball game when you have this possibility.
Okay. Well, I certainly intended when I used the word shape as an adjective of reality, I was meaning it sort of metaphorically rather than topologically.
I know, but the trouble with the word
could
shape...
just as well have said flavor, or...
No, but shape is as good as anything there. What topology, geometry deals with similar shapes. A triangle is similar to another triangle. But topology, you can take anything you can take anything from a square to a triangle to a heptagon or something. They all, topologically, are the same. So is a circle. Right. But the donut or torus is not the same.
So maybe the right question is there a fundamentally correct order of connectivity of the universe? And your answer to that is yes, it's a sphere with one handle.
Yeah.
It's a
sphere. Well, the torus is a sphere with one handle.
He's quite up on this, and you can have toruses with many handles, but the torus with one handle is the only one that's a complete solution to that equation, because the others are very sort of messy.
Well, would you say that the whole theory of process with the 4 levels and the 7 stages is itself a shape to reality?
Oh,
a shaping of reality?
Is it a view of what you regard as the correct shape of reality, or a fruitful view of reality?
That's one of those, have you stopped beating your wife? Well, I like to say that's the way it is. Now, if I say it's a theory, then you say, well, how can you disprove it, or so on? You know, falsifiability.
Yeah.
And they throw that around as though, scientists always throw that at me, as though they weren't violating that, because they've been falsified long ago by ESP, but they just ignore it. But I don't think this question of falsifiable theory stands for first principles. No. You do your best to figure it out, and you don't expect to get it right, but you keep trying, and you're not just saying the moon's made of green cheese, other absurdities. You're doing as well as you can to figure it out.
Well, to me, I've been wanting to say this all day. To me, the classic example of scientific law, the paradigm for scientific law, for the potentially falsifiable observation, is the one that says things don't just disappear. I think it has all the qualities of scientific law.
I like to entertain both possibilities and see what happens. There are some things, I mentioned before, that could be destroyed. Other things can't be destroyed. There's a distinction.
Right.
The things that are simple in essence, like energy, can't be destroyed. But if you build something out of bricks, the bricks can be destroyed, or the building can be destroyed, but the substance of the bricks is conserved according to science.
Yes, but
would you feel then that the basic law of conservation of energy and momentum is a law that would apply through the entire universe?
Well, with the black holes, there's something coming up that might be an exception, but with that exception, it would.
Well, it doesn't seem to apply to consciousness, for example. Things might not disappear, but they sure appear.
Well, what is karma then?
I think karma is a Hindu cop-out for thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to yield to a nice wisecrack, but seriously.
I meant seriously. Karma, if anything, originally meant habit. Mm-hmm. In the same sense that to the Greeks, character was destiny. Habit was karma to the early Hindus, but it was too complicated an idea to teach the masses. So they made it into this thing that goes on. They couldn't teach the...
Well, could you say destiny was habit?
Yeah, in large part.
Well,
human behavior.
Then the habit is something that's passed from one life to another and is not compound.
I don't know what it means to pass from one life to another. All I know is this life.
Well, do you want to do this routine again? Because
I'm sure.
If you've done it before, I'm willing to go elsewise and elsewhere. I mean,
well,
I'm here in a sense partly to play straight man.
Okay.
So I don't. Let's not.
Well, here's what I'd like to talk about. You have this very interesting notion of 4 specific states of reality.
4 states of consciousness.
States of consciousness.
Which are 4 ways of construing reality.
Which are the sensory reality, the clairvoyant reality, the mythic reality, and the transpsychic reality.
My goodness.
I think I just read the book.
How about that?
I'm kind of dissatisfied with them, just sort of, they're all there and you can list them in any order you want.
Exactly. It depends on what you're trying to do.
Well, no, that's fine. It's fine with me that it depends on what you're trying to do. I want to see some sort of structural relationship between them. I want you to say, well, there's this axis that connects the clairvoyant to the sensory, and this axis that connects the mythic.
You've got bad habits from me, I guess.
Oh, I've been doing this years before I met you.
Okay.
But yes, we have the same bad habit. And I'm wondering if you see any structure like that as being possible.
No, not at the moment. I don't question that it may well be there, but I certainly don't see it. It seems to me that the stage we're at in science today, and overall in the stage that I've been working at, it's a stage of trying to say, yes, there's more than one way of organizing reality. You have a choice. You're not bound, you're not limited. You decide exactly on what you're trying to do. If I want to cross the highway, or the freeway in the rush hour, I damn well better be in the sensory reality, or else I want to unite with a truck, and that's not healthy, biologically speaking. If I want to survive biologically, I need the sensory reality. If I want the kind of serenity, peace, and strength that comes from knowing I stand upon an absolutely firm rock, the rock of the universe, that Plotinus was right when he said, no man walks on an alien earth. That Bruno was right when he said, out of this world we cannot fall. If I want this kind of serenity, then I need the clairvoyant reality, and so forth. But I don't know that one is more real than another. Is it more real when I'm looking at the Waldstein Sonata, and I'm examining the notes and analyzing it, the notes, and say, yes, this is derivative of so forth, and here's where he's building up. Is this more real than when I'm listening to it, and the music's inside and outside, I'm not conscious of listening with my ears or anything, which is more real?
Well, certainly no one here is going to argue that one of those realities is more real. At least I don't think you are. But you're going to argue, I think, that there are relationships between, I mean, one imaginable relationship between the realities is the relationship of more realness. There are...
I can't, there is, but I don't think there is such a thing as more realness.
Excuse me. One imaginable incorrect fallacious claim
How about that?
could be that there is a relationship between the realities of more realness. I mean, just as one imaginable incorrect fallacious claim is, one could argue that the sensory reality was in some sense objectively to the left of the clairvoyant reality. Okay, that would be a mistake. But it might be that there are relationships between them which aren't mistakes, which can be surfaced. And it seems to me that the theory of process
well, perhaps
lets
that's
us do
the
that.
question that you asked me to recur or go back to. When this was about Elizabeth, with her 8-dimensional, was explaining that you could have precognition because in 8 dimensions the timeline can sweep around and be contiguous so that the precognition and the event were very close together. But one of my criticism was that the precognition is in no sense like an event. If you precognize an earthquake, it isn't like another earthquake. So you have to distinguish different levels of reality in order to distinguish these two things. But she didn't pick me up on that, so now I have an opportunity to talk about it, which is one of the levels, to me, would be the level at which you can make the precognition, and that's in no sense equivalent to the sensory reality.
These are completely different domains of experience, and there are different laws applying.
But if I can pick up on something you said it depends on what your purpose is and which thing you're interested in or what you do. But I could ask, well, what level is the purpose?
I think that in the level of consciousness, there is teleology. In the
but so is the sensory awareness in consciousness.
no, the only, it always reminds me of it seems to me, absolute idiocy of people who say there's no such thing as the ego, or the ego is an illusion. We have one bit of primary data. The one thing we observe is our own ego. And these people get so afraid of it because it doesn't fit the neat little level of the sensory world that they say it can't possibly exist, it must be all illusion.
Well,
the world,
I wouldn't say that.
No, you wouldn't say this, but I would say, speaking of people who went in this particular direction, I think that the problem of precognition is really that in the realm of consciousness, space, time, causality are quite different than in the realm where you have billiard balls hitting each other on a table, or in a realm where you have subatomic particles, or in the realm where you have stars and light rays floating around.
You've pressed my button, so now I have to...
Please.
Right, well,
Go ahead.
Okay.
now I want to hear the pure response.
Well, I can say very simply that the realm of precognition or purpose is free of both space and time. Then there's a realm that's embedded in time but is free in space, and this may cover some telepathy. For instance, when you sense the condition of a person 1,000 miles an hour away by ESP, if you like, but that's time-bound because it would be futile to give their condition 2 months from now. You must be keyed in. And in fact, all those, remember that book of Gurney, Podmore, and Davis, 6,000 apparitions at the point of death. The one common feature of all these is that it was exactly at the point of death that the apparition occurred. So there's a sense there's a range of psychic phenomena which are bound in time. The one that's so harder to understand because we take it for granted is the conceptual realm. And I would say that's bound by space in the sense that all concepts are spatial in nature. Now this could be argued, but if I have the concept of a triangle, I invoke mental space to describe it. In other words, to state relationship structure, you have to have a kind of simultaneity, otherwise the structure can't be said to exist as a structure. The simultaneity means you've lifted it out of time and just dealing with the spatial aspects, like one frame of a movie or something like that. And then when you combine those two realms, the one that's caught in time and the one that's caught in space, you get this realm where you're caught in both.
This is fascinating. And you're saying something of tremendous importance. And one of the aspects of what you're saying, if I understand you, is that in each realm, you have to first define what you mean by such terms as space, time, causality, observer, observed, and so forth. And that these may be different. Do I hear you correctly on this?
Absolutely correct. I was hoping to make a direct correlation with your four, and at least two of them do. I'm not quite sure about that. I don't want to drive your pegs into my holes, but I like to find these correlations wherever I can. Mm-hmm. And one of the major confirmations is in the ancients, the concept of four elements. And people neglect this. So even Aristotle didn't really understand what the ancients were talking about, the four elements, because he reinvented them by talking about his four causes. Never thought that the four causes are the four elements. Because he, like modern minds, thought, well, fire, that's what you get when you light a match, or air, that's what's blowing around, water, that's what's in the ocean. But these were only analogies to aspects of a situation which were quite comparable to Aristotle's four causes.
You want to? He was really talking in terms of originally the elements were in terms of such things as final cause, efficient cause, and so forth.
Final cause was fire, which creates the other things, and the divine parents were fire and water, and they cohabited, and they were so stuck together that the children didn't have any space. So there are different versions of this myth, many, but they all say that the sun went between and pushed them apart. And one says, well, that's why we have Father Sky and Mother Earth, and so on.
You want to do this? The four causes and the four elements. I assume that the efficient causes matter.
See, there's efficient, formal, final, and...
Yes, the material, that's the hardest one, is the substance of the table. That's simple enough. But when you extend it, it includes what I call substance too, the emotions and values. Did you know Whitmont? Oh, he was, came to one of my seminars, a very bright guy. He was a psychologist and Jungian and also a doctor. But he said, the one thing I can't buy, when you equate substance and value. And I was, for the moment, lost, and I just, at the top of my head, well, would you agree that matter was substance? He said, yes. I said, well, then why do we say things matter? But
I have to tell an anecdote, or repeat an anecdote. This is, I guess, in Bertrand Russell's autobiography. There is this story that, as he was interested in philosophical issues as a child, and his parents were very critical of it, and their way of expressing their criticality of his interest in philosophy was to repeat this sort of negative nursery rhyme that went, what is matter?
Oh, right.
What is matter, never mind. What is mind, no matter.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing that drives one to become at least one sort of a philosopher.
Either a philosopher or an anti-metaphysician.
Well, I think these things each have their place, and it's time they would be helpful to science. See, science is dealing with, presumably, the sensory world, the objects. But it wouldn't do just to go on making experiments forever. They have to form some kind of generalizations from the experiments. That would be the air realm, which comes next, concepts. But what they miss out altogether is what the ancients call water, and which I call projective in general. It's value in general. I use that. They can always censor this tape, but I'll use it because I think you'd appreciate it. I was reading Whittaker, who's quite a good scientist. He was Eddington's secretary, and he was commenting on Kant's a priori space and time, and he said, that's all nonsense. We begin with the concept of length, and we go out and measure things, and then we have our universe. And I thought to myself, well, how can you begin with a concept of length? That's a fairly complicated notion. An infant doesn't have a concept of length. And then what does the infant do? Well, it has yearning, longing. Well, is there any relation between longing and length? And I looked it up in the dictionary, and it just happened to be a dictionary that had the root. They both came from the Anglo-Saxon word belangen, which means to have an erection.
It's wonderful.
I think it's beautiful because it also shows that the longing is something non-objective. It's fastened to you.
Now, you spoke a moment ago of science being limited to things out there, things you mentioned. But this isn't science. This is scientism.
Right, right.
And this is the narrow restriction.
No, but when they come to reciting their creed, they give you that stuff, you see.
But when they come to reciting their creed, they're already defending themselves against any possibility of growth, thought, or advancement. They're saying we must go on in the nice little safe model of 19th century science that stays within its quiet little walls, that everything is built
Now,
on.
you're the psychologist, and we are trying to figure out why is this the case? Why can't they welcome these new discoveries of quantum physics and get off this
What's wrong with those people anyway?
With which people, scientists?
Yeah.
They're just like anybody else. They're mostly meatheads. I mean, you take any field you know, you will find that 80% of the people are pretty much meatheads, 15% are competent technicians, and 5% are creative. Why should the scientists be different? This goes for grocery store clerks, people who make chairs, carpenters, artists, and everything else. We all think that in the next field, the field that we don't know, people are different. I remember the first time I came into a hospital, I always had an idea the doctors always knew what they were doing. Went into my first staff conference and trying to decide where to cut on this guy. Showing him the lower part of the spine or the upper part of the spine, or she was just going to look around. I had a beautiful anxiety attack, but I gave up an illusion.
Really?
When I first got into art theory, I always thought that art theorists were concerned with the beautiful. Hell, they're concerned with counting brushstrokes. and publishing papers and the weight of the papers. They're like anyone else. Science, however, also has a job, and the job is partially to be conservative.
Yes, I think that's an important point that you made.
Yeah, to defend, to make the new ideas prove themselves, to make the new ideas go through the tempering fire.
Yes, they need that that resistance, otherwise they don't have any real shape.
Yeah, there's no stability to thought unless you have, in a sense, a core of people who say, you come up with a new idea, you come up with a new view of reality, prove it, demonstrate it, do it according to the rules. Show that you are a master of the discipline and not just a schizophrenic bouncing off the roof.
Or else create some pragmatic results that generates the existence of a new discipline. That's the other way to do it.
Yeah. We were talking before about the fact that no idea really has an impact on a culture until it does two things. Until first it's described in the language that fits the culture, fits the zeitgeist. And second, it's turned into a practical idea. And the classic example of this is the knowledge of the unconscious.
Didn't you say something about a theory? It had to have a
practical application.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it had to have a. Well, I thought you said theory.
No. Oh, yes, and it has to be part of a general theory,
right?
A general metaphysics.
Yeah.
The knowledge of the unconscious was around for thousands of years. We'd all had the experience. I can't remember the name of a book in the morning. I can in the afternoon. The knowledge in the meantime was obviously somewhere. So of course I've got an unconscious. But it didn't have any impact until Freud did three things. First, he tied it into the metaphysics of his time. Second, he stated language that fit the time. And third, he made it into a practical tool. Then it had a tremendous impact. It's affected us in psychotherapy, child raising, art, God knows what.
So, from this point of view, there's certain ideas that don't fit into any structural framework, but that work really well. Rules of thumb, things that people know.
So they'll be found and lost, and they'll have a temporary effect, but they won't make any real difference. There was, if you look at any medical textbook, for example, you'll find that nobody went into the belly successfully until 1820. And every major medical history book will tell you. In the First Crusade, somebody had made a discovery. And that is how to suture intestines. And you need a bobbin for that, something you can sew around it. So along on the First Crusade, they brought sacks of the windpipes of dogs, because this made the perfect bobbin. You can put them in the intestine, suture around it, and then the digestive juices would dissolve it and be clear.
This is to hold it open.
Yeah, and you'd hold it open, you leave a bobbin inside, sew around, and then it'd be dissolved. Now the implication of this is tremendous. It meant that at that time, somebody had figured out how to successfully go into the belly surgically and have people live. But the knowledge wasn't part of a general metaphysic, part of a general system. They couldn't fit anywhere and it got lost.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true of any new idea. You're dealing with an idea that one should regard reality as process rather than as a group of static objects. It went out one place, one now in another. Okay, what you're going to have to do is take this idea, first put it in language that fits the culture, that fits the zeitgeist, and then show where it can be usefully applied. Then it'll make an impact, not otherwise. I think it's true of any new idea. An idea's got to stand up against the obstacle course that science puts up, which is very good, otherwise we'd have chaos.
But don't you think that scientists are putting up an infinitely high obstacle course against accepting parapsychology?
Not in the least. I think the parapsychologists are putting up most of the obstacle course themselves. First of all, in their absolute refusal to escape from 19th century theory, their insistence that parapsychology and the parapsychological phenomena be explained on the basis of billiard balls, mechanical cams and shafts, and essentially a machine model of the sensory reality. That's part of it. Their refusal to deal with theory, their own anxiety about it. I mean, the greatest saboteurs in the world, speaking as a parapsychologist, are parapsychologists.
Are people in parapsychology really trying to explain it that mechanistically?
Oh, that mechanistically? Oh, yes. They call it, they have a better name for it. They don't call it mechanistic, they call it physicalist theories. But it's really nice mechanistic theories. And we must be very scientific. And you know what this means? This is the model of the 19th century physicist.
Well,
That's what they're trying to deal with.
John Palmer was saying a little while ago that he thinks the paradigm inside of parapsychology is shifting from that to a synchronicity model. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think that there's some tendency, I think it's immensely unfortunate, because synchronicity is one of the most confused philosophic theories that's ever come down the pike. If you look at the book,
I agree, yeah.
This is the only place that Jung ever lost his nerve. In the first 7 chapters of that book, he's really going forward, developing this example and model. Then the 7th chapter, he turns around and says, well, maybe it's due to gravitational fields. Maybe there's a nice physical model. Let's pretend there's a model. I think it's a very confused idea.
Who is this?
Jung, who wrote Jung and Pauli, originally wrote the book Synchronicity.
Right.
They coined the idea. I think it's unfortunate that if it is on a synchronistic model, I think that what you're going to have to do is a very simple scientific thing which scientists generally refuse to do unless you force them into a corner and kick them very hard. And that is to take the data in each field on its own terms. This is what you were saying before. You were saying that when you come into each realm of experience, you have to take the data in its own terms. You have to say, what does space mean here?
Right.
What does time mean here? Not with the preconceptions. Well, the parapsychology refused to do that. And of course they're in trouble. Most scientists have refused. Physics was forced by tremendous pressure to do it in the realm of the very small, the microcosm, the realm of the very large. But most physicists are terrified of the idea that there's more than one way of organizing reality, and that you have to take it in terms of time and space in each reality. They're terrified. So they go around saying, well, it's all in the equations, and really nobody can understand it unless you understand the equations. Yeah, if you can't explain it, you don't know it.
Let's talk about your theory for a second.
Well,
I'd like to know how you've laid out a set of requirements for a theory being accepted. I'd like to know, first of all, to what extent you think your theory has met those requirements.
I would sidestep that challenge. When people used to ask me, what use would the helicopter be? And I was trying hard to make it work. And what did I have to do with thinking what use? I said, well, you could oil weather vanes. As a matter of fact, it wasn't any worse than what they actually did. The first successful use of the helicopter was to blow the dew from cherries. Now, if I told them that, they would have thought I was really cool. But this saved an enormous cherry crop by just getting the dew before it's absorbed in the cherry, and then the cherry bursts and they can't sell it. Well, what do you do with a theory? Now, I'd rather not answer that. In fact, I'm propelled by a need to answer my own questions about what is nature of things and how do you get back to the ultimate unity and things like that. How does duality emerge from unity and then diversity from the duality? And then to say, well, what use is that? I don't know. But Frank Bohr is going, he's a chemist and a doctor, and he's really going to town using the theory explaining how the complicated biochemicals work in the body. And he's using these 4 levels with more besides to show some of the chemicals sort of send the orders. Others make the blueprints, the melanin, which is a sheet molecule and very receptive to light. That's what makes you get sunburn. And this melanin takes an imprint of what's to be done, apparently from the DNA, and then the actual energy transfer, I don't remember the names of the chemicals, but he's finding the theory useful in that sense. And he says it has predictive power.
And I'm hoping to make use of it in explaining the phases of software design for building computer software.
I think that that's absolutely right here. When you're designing a theory, you don't say what use is it. The proper answer to that is not the oil weather vanes, I think, but what use is a baby?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
That's
yeah,
the only answer to this.
Right. It's going to decide itself.
Yeah, exactly. And its internal validity and its structure will decide where it's used and how it's used. But I think that it will not make an impact on the culture until it's used. But it's not the responsibility of the man designing the theory to say use it in this way or that way. That comes out of its own validity.
Well, I itch to have the kind of discussion we're having, and I've waited a long time for this opportunity. I'd say 20 years. Get someone who can talk back and forth about it, because I've been with child for 20 years and it's getting sort of painful.
Well,
But I'd like to go back to one aspect that you mentioned, because I think it's absolutely crucial. The business that in each realm, the space and time may be different, and that explains, then most of the paradoxes disappear.
Right.
And that so many of the paradoxes and problems are completely artificial due to an improper conceptualization of what reality is shaped like, or how to construe it.
Well, what we're missing here is the concept of organization, perhaps, and these levels interact in a way to create organization. You don't really begin to get organization until the cell, because already the molecule is a combination of atoms, but it's not an organization in the sense that I mean organization. A cell is an organization in much the sense that a company is. If somebody dies, it'll replace that member. Whereas in a combination, if you remove something, it's a different combination.
So that when you get to this particular realm or domain of the cell level, then already something completely new has been added.
Right, right. Each one of these new stages adds something new, but it doesn't, it still accumulates what's gone before.
All the levels are compatible.
Right.
There's no incompatibility. Your concepts are wrong, I think.
Well, if cell involves the molecules, and the molecules involves the atoms, and so on down. But it's difficult in science to find that kind of a concept. Mostly science is dealing with things interacting rather than things incorporating things. And they try to talk about these higher levels of organization as emergent properties. And that misses the point, because to say that let's say the purpose of the table is an emergent property, it's something that one biologist or one scientist said, it's due to our ignorance of the exact motion of the particles. I thought that was horrible, but that's what he said. But I would have to remind him that why is the table there?
No, are people really saying that the purpose is an emergent property?
Well, the meaning of the table was an emergent property. It's rather the same thing. For instance, he was talking about the newsprint. The meaning is an emergent property of the print. Now, I thought that offended my sensibilities.
Yeah, that's
because
wrong.
Why did the print get there in the first place? In other words, you're ignoring why it got there.
See, I think you can say, if you look at a nut and bolt, you can say that tightness is an emergent property that comes into being at the nut and bolt level that didn't exist at the molecule of steel level. That, I think, is a correct use of emergent property, but not the purpose for which the thing is being tightened.
Well,
that's
the
outside of the
tightness
ladder.
is a molar property that you can, I'm sorry, but this presses a button too. Tightness, in order to have tightness, you have to have redundancy.
Say again?
In order to have tightness, you have to have redundancy. Suppose I were to tighten a spring. Well, I've got to have a structure around it that will hold still while I tighten the spring. And this, I believe, is another dimension, internal stress. And it's that which distinguishes the plant or the organization from a purely molar arrangement. A seed has an internal stress which will release and help the plant to grow enough so it can get started on its own chlorophyll and taking energy from the sun. But that's really getting pretty far out. But I'm trying to show that at a higher level, there's still a meaningful way you can invest this new organization with a totally new thread or a new contribution to the whole. But it doesn't arise as an emergent property. It arises because it's built into the purpose of the thing in the first place. I mean, for instance, suppose you purposely write a letter, then there is some kind of meaning contained in those sentences. It's not an emergent property of the ink. It's the reason you wrote the sentence the way you wrote it. And that meaning could be instantiated.
Well,
I'd like to see science expand itself to include those things which are part of our natural way of thinking.
You think meaning is correctly part of the domain of science?
Yeah.
Unequivocally, yes. It depends also, on the level at which you're speaking, the way you're organizing it. If I am dealing with mechanics, a few particles interacting, I've got certain things that I can observe, certain laws there. I've got mass, position, velocity. Mm-hmm. I get a lot of interacting molecules. I'm dealing in another domain. I'm dealing with thermodynamics. Now new observables appear here. You don't even ask where they come from. Now we've got pressure, temperature, entropy, free energy, and so forth. When we're dealing with the level of consciousness, or anything we perceive, or anything our consciousness affects, which includes the selection of domain, of course purpose is a factor. Purpose is an observable which appears at this level. It is not magical, it's not unusual. It does, when a machine starts working, there's no purpose. A machine is just simply rolling around and around and around. You wind it up and the spring looses. When I wind the spring, there's purpose involved. This is when you reach the level of life, you get purpose. Otherwise, it's ridiculous.
Incidentally, Patty, I've forgotten his first name, he's a biologist, P-A-T-T-I. He's suggested that science have it backwards. It isn't that life equals machines, it's that living creatures make machines. They're the first ones to make machines. You don't find machines in nature. Mm-hmm. Not until man came along did you find machines.
And so you've already got purpose in your background.
Right.
Before you even define the sensory level, define mechanics. When you're dealing with billiard balls and they're in motion, purpose is not a useful observable. When you're talking about the guy who hit the billiard balls, talking about Minnesota Fats, then you got purpose. He's there for a reason.
Who's playing the billiards?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I keep looking for something I can get you guys to disagree about.
Why? We're both very wise, intelligent, creative people. Why would we disagree?
And I'm having a hard time formulating a question that you'll have different answers to.
Well, you must have something.
But the one I want to look for is, you have a notion of four realities.
At least.
At least. To the extent that you understand this notion, Arthur, do you think that correctly understood there are any laws that work in all of them?
No. In fact, I've scheduled them, technical apologies. The level of these things work in the normal way with the consideration that boundary conditions have to be incorporated. This third level, this is the fourth level, the third level of concepts has perfect laws that work, but you haven't got the boundary conditions, so you can't solve equations until you do. Then when you get to the second level, you have to drop, it's the law of association, I believe. The third, you drop the law of commutation. And by the time you get to the first level, you've dropped all three laws of arithmetic. And I'd be partial to saying there are no laws at the first level.
At the first level.
I think that even your most basic laws, slicing this a somewhat different way, most basic laws that we consider to be basic to the universe, such as the second law of thermodynamics, simply do not apply in many areas, in many realms. The law of conservation of mass, energy, and momentum doesn't apply in the realm of consciousness.
Right.
Because if I have two ideas and you give me a third idea, I may wind up with 12 or 15 ideas.
Or you may wind up with one idea that incorporates them all.
One law to present as a candidate for a law at the first level is do what thou wilt.
Well, is that a law?
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
It may be good Rabelais, but I'm not sure that it goes further than that.
If you're really interested in the first level laws, this took me a hard work to figure out. The law of distribution breaks down at the first level. And how is that equivalent to what I already had there? Now, this is a little technical, but bear with me because I think it's fun. Distribution says that AB plus AC is equivalent to A times B plus C.
So already you need two operations for the distribution law to mean anything.
Right. And then I tried to translate that into something that had reality for me. So I said, well, at least this was what I ended up with. The captain of Company A plus the captain of Company B is not equivalent to the general. See, it's the law of what do I call it? Well, anyway, its negation then creates the law of hierarchy. It was the law of distribution, but its negation is hierarchy. And all I can say about that is that photons do differ in their energy content, for instance.
From each other?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, a photon, say this white light that's shining in my face, has an energy of about 2 electron volts, but a photon that creates a proton has about 1 billion electron volts. And theoretically, you could have a photon that contained the energy of a whole galaxy. This is what's happening in the black hole, but there again, I can't get the scientist to go there. His formulas break down, so he avoids that area. But that would appear to be what's happening, that the black hole is the shrinkage of matter until it has to occupy a smaller space than the most dense matter. The only thing that can occupy a smaller space is a photon, because the smaller the photon is, the greater its energy. This is very mind-blowing, and I think it ought to be sort of blazoned across headlines because it's so
So
unexpected.
you think there's one very high-energy photon at the center of the black hole rather than a pure singularity?
Well, whether it's several or many, I don't know, but it would have to go into photonic form if it's to get any denser than the dense matter.
Fascinating.
Now then, of course, you can say, well, it's ready to blow up into a white hole. And I would throw that out, but I can't prove it because, as I say, there's no law. It could stay there indefinitely, waiting for when it wanted to blow up.
It can do whatever it wants,
Yeah.
which is the property of the first level.
Have in the discussion so far, you made a clear statement of the different levels, what they are, the first, second, third, and fourth level?
Well,
There's something I'm not clear on. I don't know if it came up earlier in the discussion or earlier in the tape. If it did, forget it.
well, I'm not sure whether you're partial to Jung's 4 functions.
I know of them.
Intuition,
Thought.
feeling,
Thought.
intellect, and sensation. Those would have a correspondence, but also the cause of Aristotle, which I did.
It's interesting along this line that at one time I was looking at the famous theory of the 4 humors and found to my great surprise that this was a very highly sophisticated, complex and workable theory of psychosomatic medicine.
I've never been able to really understand it, but somebody must have done it right. The 4 humors, I would rather not be responsible for that, although I've tried to relate all possible 4s.
Do you have a mapping from this set of 4 realities to the 4 Jungian functions?
No, it's simply something that never occurred to me before this discussion. I think it'd be interesting to take a look at.
Because if you can map those to the Jungian functions, and if you
Yeah,
can map the
right,
levels to
right.
the Jungian
That's a
functions,
fascinating idea. You know, I think we could
then
do
we've
this.
got it together.
Yeah.
It's sort of a feeling it would fit a little work.
Well, clearly the sensory reality is matter.
Right. It was sensation.
And would be thought.
No, sensation.
Sensation.
Sensation, yeah.
Right.
And
I don't know.
I'm
I'm not sure
I don't
the
think we
others. I
can
have
do
to
it
think
right
about it.
here.
Yeah, I don't think we can do it.
I didn't want to take the liberty of doing that because everybody likes to arrange their own, peel their own bananas.
Please be my guest. I'd be more than honored and delighted if you would.
Well, I can see the mythic is at the top,
Yeah.
as related to the fire. But I mixed up between the clairvoyant and the trans-psychic, as to which those...
One is air and one is water.
Yeah.
I think there's an equivalent problem in the way that the Tarot are mapped into the planets. There's 2 systems for doing it because people get confused between water and air.
Well, I get that trouble continually because I have air below water. And most people would want to see the air between the fire and the water because it's lighter. But as I said, the myths all describe how the divine parents were stuck together and the son had to get between them. And I remember talking about this at the Wainwright House. People looked very blank, and I said, well, for those of you who want a more physical explanation, when you boil water, it's the vapor pushes it apart, and they all sort of were greatly relieved.
So this sort of leaves us with a reasonable stopping place, or at least a project, an assignment for the reader, which is to try to map these systems together.
That'd be fascinating to try to do.
Well, I've got my fingers crossed and all that kind of thing, but you might find something you could use in the geometry of meaning.
I will look for it, because if we tie these three aspects together, it'd be fascinating.
Any final comments before we run out of tape?
Well, I want to thank you very much for, I know it's been quite an effort to come over here after 2 days, and I can sympathize because I've had a similar 2 days.
Well,
at any rate, I thank you.
I must confess I was feeling sorry for myself before I came, but I've learned a good deal tonight, so now I feel very pleased that I did, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Harris, for...
I'd like to say I've really enjoyed meeting you, getting to hear about your ideas in person. I've been sort of steeped in them for the last couple of days. It's been a real pleasure.
We didn't get rid of that one about the cult.
The cargo cult, no.
Yeah.
No, I wish we had. It was a discussion of parapsychology.
Anyway, so
time.
thank you very much.